Jim's asked how many days the store is open, and I'm going to tell you that today is day 5,516 that Boswell's been here in business. Thank you, everybody. And I'm absolutely thrilled to spend it here with Jim Higgins. Now, tonight he's going to be in conversation with Piet Levy. Milwaukee Journal Sentinel features music and pop culture, say that ever, apparently. Pop culture critic. Piet is going to be conversing with the one and only Jim Higgins. You know him, of course, as the arts and books editor for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. That has been following his time as pop music critic, jazz critic for the Milwaukee Sentinel before that. He's author also of Wisconsin literary luminaries from Laura Ingalls Wilder to Ayad Akhtar. He's a two-time winner of the Wisconsin Area Music Industry Award for Music Journalists. And he's here tonight with his new book, Sweet, Wild, and Vicious, Listening to Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. I read this book in manuscript. I read it again when it became a book. It's absolutely fabulous. I can't say enough good things about it. I can't say enough good things about Jim. So let me go ahead and turn it over to him. Give him a warm welcome.
Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Yeah, it's this crowd. It's always good to get a bookseller involved early in your book because they will say all kinds of amazing things about it. So thank you, Chris. So the way this works here at Boswell is they don't want me to read for 45 minutes and bore you all to sleep. They always say, yes, really short reading is the drill here. So I'm just going to read you a really, really short passage. And for those who don't have one, this book is mostly an album by album guide to the albums of the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed. That's the bulk of the book. And if you're old enough to remember liner notes, this book is really kind of like alternative liner notes that the record company didn't approve that I wrote. And then there's a series of extra things in the back, and I won't tell you what they are, but all kinds of extra things. And the kind of person I had in mind is the kind of person who knows a little about Lou or the Velvet Underground, but wants to know more. And I thought often about people who use streaming services or YouTube. And so you can sample all this stuff without plunking your money down, to see if you like it or not. So I had that kind of person in mind when I wrote this. So now Lou had a really winding and messy and complicated life as well as musical career. And so I thought the only fair thing, most salespeople would come up here and give you the shiniest or the best thing up front. So I'm going to read the opening of the section of his strangest and weirdest album. And then that'll help you figure out if you like the way I write or not. It's an album called Metal Machine Music. Do any of us know that record? Yeah. John knows the record. Okay. And let me just read you the very opening of that section. What if all the theories about Metal Machine Music, Lou Reed's notorious Noise album, are true? That it is A, Reed, the guitar and equipment junkie having fun with feedback, and B, the most obnoxious middle finger ever delivered as a contractually obligated album, and C, a Warholian gesture, and D, Reed's establishing himself as an underground artist after commercial success, and E, a daring progenitor of contemporary noise and electronic music. A double LP in the vinyl days, Metal Machine Music consists of more than 64 minutes of processed guitar feedback, distortion, and effects. No songs, no lyrics, no melodies. I'm not making this up, people. The first time I experienced this monstrosity, I listened to it in the car over several days. While it can be played at ear-splitting levels, and my guess is that's how Reed would want you to listen to it, I played it at moderate volume, loud enough to hear details without giving me a headache, but not so quietly as to treat it as background or ambient sound. I've also imbibed it through headphones. Each time I listen to it, it gets a little easier to stay with, though not any easier to grasp. It is a slippery monolith without handholds. Metal Machine Music is not chaotic. It's not a John Cage experiment in aleatory music. It changes as it moves through time, but those fluctuations mean nothing to me. It is impenetrable. It is like the neutrino signal from space that scientists detect in Stanislaw Lem's His Master's Voice. They desperately want it to be an intelligent transmission. They find or force uses from it. But at the end, they are no closer to understanding it or even certain if it is something that can be understood. And later in this chapter, I tell you the connection between metal machine music and Star Trek for those who are fans of both. Yeah, want to come over?
It is such a pleasure to be here and a packed house, and just Jim, thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you everyone for showing up. And I can't tell you how thrilled I am that this is existing. I remember vividly, or somewhat vividly, back in when Lou Reed passed away,
2013.
2013, you did this blog for the Journal Sentinel for Tap Milwaukee, going through all of Reed's albums, or what was the plan? For
All the solo albums through that point, and it was 1 or 2 a week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was just loved the writing so much. I loved the passion so much. I loved how clear it was. And I do remember telling you, like, this needs to be a book. And so I'm so thrilled that it is a book, and it's a beautifully done book. So a round of applause for the fact that this book exists and that you wrote it. I will take full credits.
Yeah. So if you hate this book, Piet is the one to blame that it exists.
Exactly. No, it's a wonderful book, and it was such a pleasure to read it. I'm so thrilled that you made it a reality. But before we get to how it became a reality, I'd really like to know what inspired you. Because tell me what you were feeling, what you processed when you heard that Lou had passed away, and to the point that you committed yourself to this project, which, you know, took a lot of time, obviously, but took so much craftsmanship and just so much work too. And it was a beautiful thing to see that you spent the time on this.
Well, it's funny. I've been reflecting on this since the book came out, and there are people who are obviously psychotically nuts about certain subjects, and talk about them all the time and are cranks on that. And I would not say I'm a Lou Reed crank, but my fandom goes back to being a college student in the 70s, and it's kind of like the fandom I experienced with some Grateful Dead fans, a fandom that includes the ability to criticize or be unhappy with some moves my heroes make, but to always be with them on the journey. And there's something about Lou's voice, both in writing of the songs and literally the delivery of the songs, that has always captivated me. And so I was sad when he died. It wasn't completely unexpected given his health, but you don't feel like the creative people you like should ever die.
Right.
They're not supposed to die. Do I go into the origin story from here of how the book came to be then?
Well, before that, I'm just really curious,
Yeah.
what inspired you to do the blog? I mean, that was an undertaking, and it's not like there are a lot of publications that were doing that. They were writing beautiful things about Reed.
Yeah.
You really took it very, very far.
I felt a need to just write about the music, again, that's artists of all kinds. When they die, there's always the danger that they're going to get forgotten, or they will be extremely oversimplified. And I just felt my way of responding to the loss is to want to go back and go through the music again. And it's such a windy, curvy, complicated career that nobody can keep it all in mind. You have to just kind of go through those things.
So I remember that I had suggested you should make this into a book. When I told you that, were you terrified by that idea?
I thought, yeah. What I really thought was, oh, Piet, he's just being nice. He's being nice to me because he's such a nice guy, unlike most of the people I work with. But no, I had no thought of doing that. I thought I was done with the subject at that point. So
okay. So yeah, how did the desire reawaken in your heart to make a book?
What happened was, in the years following Lou's death, there have been a number of biographies, and maybe some of the folks here have read them, the Anthony DeCurtis bio and several other ones, including the recent Will Hermes bio. And of course, I read all of them and enjoyed their attempts to figure out his life. And my theory is there is no figuring out of his life. There's no one I read a criticism of the Hermes bio that he never unlocked the secret of Lou Reed. I said, well, I think the secret of Lou Reed is that there isn't one secret of Lou Reed. It was a guy who changed a lot and didn't always know what he was doing himself. But I came away from those books with some frustration that their biographies, they're concentrating on the life. You know, they're trying to document the life, make sense of the life. And to some extent, they get into the art as it relates to life, but they're not critical studies, you know, and specifically in the Curtis book, there's one paragraph on Coney Island Baby, the record Coney Island Baby, which is one of my favorite albums of Lou Reed. And I felt frustrated by that. I wanted to see more on those subjects. And so I was discussing that with my friend Greg Cott, who's here at one point, and you know, he's like you, another like highly charged optimist, and he said, "Well, you should write a bio, man." And I thought, no, the last thing the world needs is some guy from Milwaukee spending 10 years writing another Lou Reed bio. But I thought what I really wanted to read was the book about the music. Just spend more time on the music, you know, the albums, what's worth hearing again, what maybe sounds better now or worse now. And I talked myself into doing a book entirely on speculation. No guarantee anybody would ever be interested. And initially I thought, after I did that series, I thought, I don't want to do this thing again of album by album, because I felt like I was wearing out near the end of that sequence. So I wrote a first version of this book, and it was all essays, all topical. Like, so there was one essay on Lou's Warhol songs, all the songs that in some respect deal with Andy Warhol and his world, which is a lot. There was a long thing on Lou as a guitar player, because he's kind of a controversial guitar player. I love his style. Some people think he's noisy and barbarian, and that's the kind of stuff I like about what he does. And so this was a very topical set of pieces, and I was happy with it. And my first readers liked it. And I did shop that around, knowing that like this is a hard sell, an unknown guy from Milwaukee writing these, you know, writing the kind of things that if, you know, Robert Christgau wrote them, or Gary Giddens wrote them, that maybe someone would be interested. But I pitched a number of the kind of places that might publish a book like this, and some outright rejections, and some, oh, we like your writing, but I don't think, you know, I can sell this book. And there have been a lot of things written about it, and that's the danger of this territory. And one reason why I held off initially in the blog thing about writing about the Velvet Underground, there's 9 million. Velvet Underground made 4 canonical albums, not counting all the various live and compilation things. And there are about 9 million books, you know. There's that old saying about, you know, they only sold a few albums, but everyone started a band. I think also everyone wrote a book about the Velvet Underground too. And but my friend Greg connected me with Ira Robbins at Trouser Press, who ran a music magazine called Trouser Press. Some of the folks here may know about it. And he has a publishing enterprise. And I sent the book to Ira. And Ira was the person who said, you know, I like your writing, but I could never sell a book like this. Would you consider doing it album by album? But having written it the other way, in a very topical way, helped me realize, well, I could go back and do that in a deeper way now, because I've already followed all these themes, you know, the whole drug addiction thing. I can take that essay and find the parts that work with each album, and through all those things. So I spent about half a year reorganizing it that way, and the rest is history.
Oh, it's incredible. Yeah, I mean, it's such a great book, and I wanted to read a couple of things kind of really indicate to me why I love this book so much, because obviously you love Lou Reed, but you also are very honest about your criticisms too. So here's just to juxtapose kind of your different perspectives on this. When you're writing about the Velvet Underground and Nico, what made the Velvet Underground different from the other 1967 debutantes is how abrasive their music was. They're not only willing to run against the grain, they were eager to irritate. Yet the Velvets never completely let go of pop and rock song formats and the desire to please inherent in them. This is the tension that would drive Reed's music career. The will to be an artiste and a provocateur who pushed words and sound past conventional limits versus the desire to make popular records without, of course, having to conform to anyone else's idea of how to do that. I think that's just so beautifully written and summarized. And then you also have something like your description of I heard her call my name from White Light, White Heat, where you said, I heard her call my name, test a listener's tolerance for disruption. It can still drive people out of a room today. And you mentioned, I love this track, but it's also close to the event horizon where chaos sucks everything in. The fact that you're not just, waxing poetic about Olive Reed's stuff. You're really like kind of looking at the, objectively and simplifying this, the good, the bad. Tell me about kind of that approach to it. Tell me about, I guess, your fascination with Reed. That it does seem like the some of the challenges that he provoked was a big key part of the fascination for you and your love of him in a way.
Lou might agree with this. I don't think I can speak for him on very many things, but every writer likes a good subject, and when it comes to musical lives, there aren't too many better subjects than Lou Reed. And a possibly relevant example, I also did a blog series on Patti Smith's music. Now, I think Patti Smith's a great musician and a great writer, but it's almost a direct straight line from her first album to her last one. There's one unusual album. Otherwise, what she's doing in her latest album is very similar to what she's doing in the first album, musically and in other respects. Lou is constantly changing and going back and forth and adjusting and trying new stuff and falling down and getting brilliantly up again. So, a great subject calls forth passion and intensity. And there are two quotes, and I can't give them directly, but I've thought a lot about them. Why does he interest me? And one is from Thurston Moore of Sonic Youth, for any Sonic Youth fans out here, who you would think would say, "Oh, I love the noisy aspect of Lou Reed," because that's what Sonic Youth did. Sonic Youth, Thurston Moore said, "It's the songs. The songs are why I got interested in Lou Reed," and it's certainly true that he was, at his best, a remarkable writer, and a really fine-tuned, precise, concise writer. And the second is a quote that he gave Michael Gilmore of Rolling Stone. And this was about the time of Take No Prisoners, his really provocative live album. And he said, "I want to make a record that pushes the world back an inch." So there's this attitude within of just, pushing back at the forces that bear down on us. And it probably made him a very difficult person to be a friend of or married to. But as an artist, I really respect and liked it. I'm as un-Lou Reedish and mild-mannered as you could get. So I probably am living vicariously through someone who is ready to push back the world an inch. I really respect that. And when you're that kind of person, you're sometimes going to push back for the wrong reasons. But I that fascinates me.
Well, so when the timeline for the book, when did you get the green light to kind of go back and do the album by album? And talk us through a little bit through the process of creating what did become the
Wow.
final book?
That was probably about a year and a half ago. And then again, it took about 6 months to do the recasting the albums, and then making sure I got all the fun parts in the back half. And so for those people who are Chris Gow readers here, the Village Voice, longtime Village Voice writer. So Lou in Take No Prisoners has a famous screed where he's complaining about Chris Gow grading his albums. And so one of my fun things in the back of the book is to go through all of Chris Gow's grades of Lou's albums and see, was he fair or not, or too hard or not? And actually, he's a really easy grader. I would have graded them harder than him. So about 6 months to do all that recasting of stuff. And then Ira, this is a one-man press, Ira's business. His wife is a fantastic art director, but he's basically the whole press. He was an amazing editor. Excellent questions, not afraid to challenge things in a respectful manner. And I should mention that both Greg, who's here, and my friend Mike Fisher, who read early versions, gave me really good feedback too. So this process has been so organic, it's hard for me to remember like what happened when. It just was a steady plugging away at it. People ask me the question, how do you find time to write a book? And I don't want my boss, Greg Borowski, to know I was doing it at work. So
Good thing he's not here.
Actually, I wasn't. It's just
Yeah.
kind of plugging away, here and there. And there was a weave of listening, reading, and writing that there was always something in front of me to do. So I never felt stuck, but I just kept going through it that way.
Sure. So, and I imagine you're just like re-listening to everything really thoroughly over and over and over again till you start screaming and just drawing crazy drawings, or
A lot of it was on Spotify. And if
Okay.
you saw my year wrap-ups, for some of those years, any Spotify users here, the year wrap-ups, I was in the top 0.0001% of Lou Reed listeners for some of those years, yes, lots of listening over and over again, especially when you're trying to understand sometimes what he's saying or who's doing what on a song. So
yeah. What listening back to it, what took you by surprise? Were there certain albums that you had dismissed that you realized that you uncovered kind of new
oh, that
new
is such a
treasures from?
setup.
or
and he-
vice versa?
I got to credit John here, John Keaty, the former poet laureate of Milwaukee, who was a dedicated Velvet Underground fan. When I did the blog series, I kind of poo-pooed Lou's late album, Ecstasy, and then got this message from John saying, "You idiot! No, more measured, as befits his status. Yeah. I think you're missing the point on this one." And so I did spend more time. And that's blog series. I was sometimes catching up with albums in a day.
Yeah.
That's the thing I felt looking back. Those were really hurried responses. This had more time. So I really dug into Ecstasy more. And it is that one really grew for me. It's Lou's last real solo album that's not like a theater project or banging heads with Metallica or doing something else. And it's a really dark, older adult album with some amazing playing on it. And produced by Hal Willner, for those who know who Hal Willner is, the longtime Saturday Night Live music producer and just a genius of production. And so that's one that really, really grew in my estimation.
Do you think did any of these albums grow as you have aged as well? When I don't know if there are certain albums that you listen to that you hadn't heard since you were, in college, for instance.
A few have gone down a bit, but I think the things I loved in college are still the ones I love now, which might make me a nostalgia artist, or maybe I just had exceptional taste in college. My college years are the late 70s, and so that's the time of Street Hassle, and I could put Street Hassle on anytime and still happily listen to it.
Was there? I was surprised when I can't remember which album it was, but you can elaborate on it. It was a live album that you mentioned was the album you went to when he passed away. That seemed really surprising because I imagine that's not necessarily, I mean, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it may not be the one that everyone would automatically go to in the wake of a passing.
It was the opening track on Take No Prisoners. It's the version of Sweet Jane where the album. Lou does a lot of non sequitur joking and riffing on this, and it's like an 11-minute Howard Stern monologue by Lou Reed, and but it has his voice in that, not only his physical voice, but the sense of this is what the guy sounded like. It is so essentially, that's the record at which he was talking about pushing back the world an inch, and I kind of go through in detail the things that are in that, but when John Gilbertson wrote about my book, he cited, sorry to quote myself here, but
no, go for it.
The thing I wrote about Transformer was Lou's voice, sardonic, intimate, and superior. All those things. It's not just the fact that he was sardonic or pushy, but also it was always an intimate voice at its best. Like I felt like he was talking right to me. And not everyone, like I rarely feel that Dylan, as much as I love Dylan, is talking right to me occasionally, but I rarely feel that way. But with Lou, it feels that way. And that opening track on Take No Prisoners feels that way. Like, oh, okay, this guy is talking right to me.
Yeah. No.
I might not want to hear what he's saying, but he is addressing me directly.
I'd love you to kind of talk a bit more about your look back at Sally Can't Dance as well. That's an interesting, polarizing album, and obviously his hit album. And because it does have kind of that baggage around it, because it was a hit album, and Lou Reed was not trying to be necessarily a conventional hit artist. I was just really curious how you kind of reapproached that album, and your writing on that album, I think, really struck out, especially.
Yeah. Lou told people himself that he was wasted in in that part of the 70s. And he didn't really know what he was doing there. And this is one of the great insights of the Anthony DeCurtis bio. He talked about Lou had a habit of changing direction in the middle of something and not telling people around him. So as the producer of that album said, it started out, it was going to be Lou's R&B album. And then he started muddling with it along the way. And so that's why you get an album with lots of horns and sort of attempts at funk and that don't really coalesce. But I also felt necessary, I really wanted to give every song its hearing. So there are some worthier, brilliant things on there too. Like Kill Your Sons, which is a song that appears to be about his own electroshock treatment as a teenager. That's the thing with Lou. Even the albums that aren't very good will have like one incredibly amazing thing on them that you got to mind that thing. And that's why I say he's a good artist for this generation, because you can make your playlist. You're not album or nothing listeners now. You can pick out and not to plug my book, but one thing is at the end of each chapter, I suggest, here's the songs you want to try first, or here are the things that I think are keepers or are the best things. So, yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that
Okay.
works. You that was one thing you mentioned kind of early, I think maybe in the start of the book, was you expressed some concern that the legacy of Lou Reed might start to be getting lost now. So and it sounds like maybe that was perhaps some motivation here too for this book, for a deep examination to all of his work.
I think it's easy for people to get whittled down to, one or two things over time, unless you're Shakespeare. And I think there's just a lot there to check out. And I've become, maybe this is an age thing, but I've become a big fan of deep dives, retrospectives, and again, for any other fellow Star Trek nerds out there, at Tor.com, there's a Keith DeCandido is a guy who writes Star Trek books, and he's done a retrospective of every episode of all the series. And I love that kind of thing. I love going back. What did I miss? What detail did I miss? What do I want to see or read again? And so I guess I just tried to apply that impulse here. That I thought, like my friend Mike and I talked about, he's listened to this music some, but not a lot. So I'm hoping someone like Mike might look at this and find more things that he would be interested in.
Yeah. What kind of feedback have you gotten so far now that the book's been published, now that this has been out there?
My kids now know it's real. When I did my first book, I think they didn't think I was really doing it. I was just using it as an excuse to escape in the office. But now they know. And actually, it's funny though. When Zoe, my daughter, and I go to a lot of theater, and while I'm doing this, we would go to shows, and the pre-show music, somebody be playing, there'd be a Lou Reed song, Velvet Underground song. It keeps popping up in the culture, and I've gotten some nice feedback in town from people who have read it. Gotten one sort of negative dismissal from some online magazine that spelled my last name wrong, but that's okay. There is very little consensus about anything Lou Reedish. It's people disagree, widely on what's the best album, what's the best period. It's like one commenter saw the no blue mask, no peace. There are just endless responses, and that's part of what makes the writing and talking about him fun. Is that there's almost an open permission to disagree, and everybody champions a different aspect of what he does.
Was there in your writing or your album evaluations, was there a particular take that you were like really excited about or jazzed about, like an album that you kept sticking with, or writing that you kept rewriting and rewriting, just something that you wanted to kind of bring out into the discourse to really challenge conventional thinking or make your stake in the debate?
Yeah. I don't know how big a stake you can make in this world at this point,
Sure.
but I found going through, especially the Velvet Underground live albums, and hearing, okay, what were the different things they were doing with these songs, and what was going on there, and that was fun to do. But I don't know that there's any one part more than another. It's just I wanted to treat, the best of my ability, the whole body of work, and I'll have something down on everything. So
You you mentioned there was surprises at the end of the book.
yeah.
You don't want to reveal too many surprises, but I'd like to reveal one of the surprises. You mentioned some artists that are connected to Lou Reed. I'd love you to talk a little bit more about Hometown Heroes, the Violent
Oh, yeah.
Femmes, and the Lou Reed connection there. I'm sure
A number of Lou Reed connections with
Yeah.
the Violent Femmes. Brian Ritchie especially openly talked about the Velvet Underground as a model for their first album and what they were doing. Victor DiLorenzo, the original Femmes drummer, really takes a lot from Mo Tucker, the Velvet Underground, and how his approach to drumming, a kind of acoustic-ish, sort of minimal-ish approach to drumming. And Victor and Brian both played on a Mo Tucker album that Lou was also involved with. So they had met him, had some contact there. And then probably the coolest part is Gordon, the singer from the Femmes, did a solo album around 2000 where these were his lyrics, but he invited a bunch of other singers to sing and perform them. So PJ Harvey's on there and other cool people. And one is a song he got Lou Reed to sing. And it's Lou Reed, a very hyperactive drummer, and Lou and Gordon just bashing away on guitars in each channel. And as I write in the book, Lou singing Gordon's lyrics, and if you're a Femmes fan, this might mean something. Lou singing Gordon's lyrics is like Fonzie speaking Ralph Malph's dialogue. It's funny to hear, these teenage Gordon preoccupations coming out of Lou's mouth.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's such a great part of it. And so as you're writing this too, were there certain music books that were in the back of your mind that you were kind of aspiring to, or that had really kind of influenced you, or did the Reed biographies kind of trickle around your, bounce around your brain a little bit as you're kind of looking through this music?
Sure, they're essential. The Curtis bio, to speak in literary terms, is probably the closest to what would be a standard life of Lou. Because of his access. He knew Lou, talked to Lou. He was able to talk to Laurie Anderson, Lou's last wife, after his death. So he had the most access to the most people. And it's a kind of respectful, slightly sympathetic baseline biography. And you got to know some of these facts to understand these albums. And so that was helpful. Each bio had some aspect that was important to keep in mind. I don't think he's related to you, but Aidan Levy wrote a bio that came out from the U of Chicago Press that focuses on two things that other people really didn't pay much attention to. One is kind of the jazz aspect of Lou. He played with a number of serious jazz musicians in a certain period of time, and on the Jewish roots of Lou. And so I was always looking to learn new things and find out new aspects. My friend Greg Codd, who's like one of America's greatest music critics, he's always kind of a role model out there for me. And this book is nowhere near the intensity of his books, but people should read his book on Mavis Staples and the Staples Singers, because it's just a masterpiece of music and culture as well. Probably the music critics I read as a youth, probably influenced me more than people writing now. And I thought a lot about Gary Giddens. And for those who know, he was the jazz critic for the Village Voice. So he's not writing the kind of things I'm writing, but his seriousness. And again, he did a piece once that was 38 different versions of the song Body and Soul and going through them. And so there's something really fun when you're reading someone who gets that deeply into a subject and cares about those differences. My book does have a bibliography of a number of other things that you can read, so you don't have to take me as the last word on the subject.
Right. So again, looking back at it, was there a certain album that you, like a section of the book that you're maybe most proud that you wrote about, or a certain album that really kind of stuck with you and you just felt very, very satisfied with kind of your take on it, or uncovering new meanings in the music maybe you hadn't heard before by spending time in this context now?
These are all my children, Piet. You're asking me to pick one. I like feeling satisfied by what I write, but I try to avoid like falling madly in love with what I write. So there are many different moments. Like I'm proud of what I wrote about Transformer. Um, but in no one thing I feel like this hangs on the whole thing. It's really, I really try to give my full attention to each thing I do as I do it and make it the best I can. And so I'm sorry, I'm going to disappoint you on that question.
No, that's totally fine. It's totally okay. So having the book out, what do you hope ultimately that people are going to be taking away from this? The fact that you've done this.
I hope people will buy it. Right. And beyond that, read it and listen to the music, and if I hear occasionally from someone who has, that makes me feel great. And my friends who work here at the store will tell you there are a billion books out there. They're all competing for everybody's attention, along with everything else everybody does. And like going to Renaissance Theater Works shows, and so I'm grateful if people are interested, and I just hope it will be around for a while, that people who want to know more can read it and know more.
What do you think your college age self would think, knowing that you have written a Lou Reed book?
My college age self was very arrogant, but not very disciplined or hardworking. So I think he would say, "Hey, man, you're kind of the opposite of me now." So I think he would be pleased that I had finally sat down and done some things. And one reason I talk very little about work in progress with people is when I was the college age guy, I was a big bragger about all the amazing things I was going to do and never followed up on them. So my self-imposed penance is to do amazing things first and before doing any bragging about them.
Well, I think you've done an amazing job. I think it's beautifully written. You've clearly spent so much time with it, and the writing is I think it's just really beautifully done, Jim. It just really is.
Good Marquette education helped there. So, and I should say that our Marquette J School crowd in the late 70s was a hotbed of Lou Reed studies. We were all Lou Reed freaks, and so thank you, Jesuits, for making this possible.
Before I open up the floor for other questions, I wanted to kind of see if there's anything else that you want to share about just what this journey's meant for you, Lou Reed's music, anything else like that, like an open question for you.
Wow. That is a really open question.
It's very open.
No, I just hope that people will check it out. And if you find something you like or find something you want to talk more about, I'm easy to find. Let me know.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Jim. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. I definitely wanted to open the floor up for questions. I'm sure there'll be some questions in the audience. And can I walk around with the mic? Is there enough length for that, or what do you repeat the question? All right, please. Yes.
I've tried to remember this, and you have to remember that I'm quite old here. So it was likely either Walk on the Wild Side or Rock and Roll Animal. So, and I think there's just immediately something about that voice and that tone, and of course the transgressive nature of those songs. And as a good Catholic boy, anything transgressive was immediately appealing to me. Thank you.
How old were you again when you heard those, do you think?
Probably about 17.
Okay. It's a good age to be inspired by something transgressive.
My dad was pretty lenient about what I could listen to at
Okay.
home, but I think I was gone already between that time. So.
Were you blasting a lot around like family?
I was blasting it in the dorm room.
In the dorm room. Yeah. Other question? Yes, please.
He lived here in Milwaukee, early 70s before Transformer. I think I was told he was going cold turkey or something. Do you know anything about that?
No, John, we got to get Chris Foran on that one.
Yeah.
That I would be fascinated to learn that. So yeah. All right, you gave us a research project, John. Thank you.
Did you Lou Reed shows in town? I
Yes.
never had a chance to see him. I saw him once at Lollapalooza 2009. Don't have much memory of that, but were there certain Milwaukee shows that you really remember?
We won't ask you why you don't have much memory of that.
I wasn't working that.
Yes,
that
I
much.
saw him several times here. The one that really stuck out was a New York tour, and
Okay.
and that it partly was his demeanor. You know, he was wearing a jacket, he had a mullet, he had a stand, because there's almost as many words on New York as there are in Hamilton. So I don't know how he could have remembered them all, but there was something about his, I think he saw that as one of his last big shots for immortality. So he took that with a kind of seriousness that maybe he didn't always take tours. I remember another one, and I don't remember what album period it was, but what I remember is the crowd at the Oriental Theater, because it was an Oriental concert, including a guy in a silver foil jumpsuit. And that's kind of thing you knew was a Lou Reed crowd in the 70s.
Any other questions out there? Yes, in the back. All right, sounds good.
And
Great
Christina,
question.
why aren't you writing this book? Uh,
Great question.
I do have some thoughts on that. Thanks, Christina. Delmore Schwartz, for those who don't know, was a mid-20th century great American writer, a poet who also wrote one of the greatest short stories of the 20th century called In Dreams Begin Responsibilities. And I'm sure Chris or somebody could find it on the shelf here. He was later in his life, he was a professor at Syracuse where Lou went to school. And I think what Lou got, Delmore wrote a kind of lush and ornate style of writing. That's not Lou. I think what Lou idolized him, got for him, was the permission to be an artist. And Lou wrote a couple of songs that mentioned Delmore, so there's homage there. And you can find on the internets audio of Lou reading Delmore's story in Dreams Begin Responsibilities, which is a story about a guy going in the movie theater, and the movie he sees on the screen is the courtship of his parents. And they had an unhappy marriage, and he desperately doesn't want them to get married. That's this amazing story. And you can hear Lou in his rugged accent reading it. John Cale, who was Lou's partner in the Velvet Underground, is a remarkable musician, who worked with John Cage and Terry Riley and some of the great minimalists and experimental American classical musicians, and was a contentious partner with Lou, who kind of raised or goaded him to some great heights. The first two Velvet Underground albums and Songs for Drella. John was still alive. John is a great arranger, musician. Lou would probably be a little less experimental without John, but the Velvet Underground got along without him on the third and fourth albums. So Lou was dumb for not having a better relationship with John, and they could have done a lot more amazing things together. But that's the challenge of Lou. So I'm sure there's influence there. But the thing is, when you hear John Cale, I know there are John Cale fans, and there's even one I won't name who think, I'd rather listen to John Cale than Lou Reed. Well, I really respect John Cale as a musician, but he reminds me of a lot of classical musicians I know. He's really good at playing what's in front of you. He will sing the text as written. But when you hear John Cale sing a Lou Reed song, there's something missing. It's the authority of the voice. And that's not to criticize John as a musician, but there's an authority in the voice that's inherent, I think, in Lou.
Jim, were there certain collaborators that worked with Lou across the years that you were really excited to re-listen to their contributions or to really sing their praises? Maybe collaborators that aren't on the level of a John Cale in terms of the notoriety.
Well, anyone who knows Lou from the 80s on, Fernando Saunders, the bass player, just the amazing bass player who played with him, who is really is playing like a lead instrument. And given that Lou was such a mean person, Fernando, when they need something sweet or very lyrical or gentle, it's often Fernando playing it. And of course, Robert Quine, the guitarist, who some of my punkier friends here will know, who really helped Lou launch Lou 2.0, and that's in 1982 with the Blue Mask. And he was a really off-kilter guitarist, and Lou recruited him for a band. And his two conditions were Lou had to start playing his own guitar again, and they would do Velvet Underground songs. And it was a very rocky relationship, but it really kickstarted what Lou did. And Quine was a fantastic guitarist. If you know Matthew Sweet's song "Girlfriend," the guitar solos on that are Robert Quine.
Yeah. Incredible. Other questions? Yes. Here.
Was there and I'm not going to say physical relationship, but was there a relationship between Nico and Lou Reed? Did he influence her? Did she influence him? I know that Eddie Warhol kind of.
Yeah. Well, happily, the biographers answered the physical question. Yes, there was something between Lou and Nico, something between John Cale and Nico. Didn't last long in any direction. I think it's pretty safe to say that he influenced her music more than she did his, but he wrote some great things for her. And you know, Femme Fatale is one. And if you go to her solo albums, the song Chelsea Girls, especially for you Warhol people, is really like the precursor of Walk on the Wild Side. So you know, the Velvets didn't like her being imposed on them in the band, but he wrote some pretty excellent stuff for her. And that's a side of Lou you should never overlook. You can think of him as an artiste and a punk and a troublemaker. He was also a professional songwriter. You know, he's a teenager who was getting paid to crank out, you know, singles at Pickwick Records. And I think there was a part of him that enjoyed the professional challenge of writing for different people, writing songs about different things.
You also suggested though in the book, I think that he didn't necessarily always like to share the mic with others, like at shows, right? If I'm remembering that correctly.
He was the boss.
Yeah.
You know, he was the guy that had to be the boss. So yeah.
Yeah, and so those are pretty rare too. But yeah, absolutely. Yes, Eric.
Did you feel free to take a pass on answering if it's already answered in the book? But has there been a Lou record that you loved? You fell out of love with, fell back in love with, you had kind of a lasting relationship, and B, which new record just pisses you off?
I fell somewhat out of love with Rock and Roll Animal, you know, because I think it appealed to the teenage me, the big guitar stuff, and now I've got into other things, but I don't hate it. I just see, oh yeah, that's the thing that got me in the door, and there's still elements I like to it, but I like other versions of some of those songs better. I wouldn't. Lulu would come closest to pissing me off, the album with Metallica, and just because it seems so misbegotten. And the thing about Lou is his concision and earthiness of his writing, and I think that some of the late life theater projects led them in this bad road of fancier writing that just did not suit where he was. And of course, poor Metallica didn't know what to do. They were deferring to him quite a bit, but even there's a good song or two. So he never totally lets me down. Even Metal Machine Music, I can appreciate as a gesture, you know.
So are you more annoyed, like more angry at Lulu than there was one album that you slammed as just a generic Lou Reed?
Oh, that's the very first album.
Yeah.
Well, I found that frustrating because it's kind of a lobotomized Lou Reed album. It's
right.
Well, even the good ones are the bad ones. There's like the strong personality, the irritating gestures, whatever. The first one I think was an attempt to give him a sound different than the Velvet Underground. It's just like a very generic 70s Rod Stewart-ish rock record. I find it frustrating that this is so bland. You know, if I wanted bland, I could go elsewhere, you know, not to lose.
There's plenty of bland out there.
Don't give me bland.
That's why I was wondering if maybe that angered you maybe even more than Lulu, which I know Lulu is It's a tough listen,
I'm
but
not an angry man. Yet. I'm more of a, I'm more like my father would have been. I'm more disappointed.
Any other questions? I've been seeing lots. Greg, yes.
Early on.
Yeah.
One thing that there's many things I appreciate about you, but one of the main efforts to write is very in a good way, because there's complicated ideas, a complicated person, they use still in a very complicated way. And God knows writing is not takes a lot of effort. So the question is twofold. One, what was the most effort involved in that? What took the most effort? And what was the one that took the least effort?
Wait, individual chapters, Greg, or I'm not sure I have that kind of memory to remember that. The hardest things for me to write about music or any kind of culture are where I feel the least. So something feels bland or mediocre or indifferent to me, that's the hard stuff to find the angle about. And that's one reason why I retired from music criticism, knowing someday Piet would come along and do it better than me. So probably the more, like that first Lou Reed album, those things would have been harder to do because I felt less strongly about them. But the truth is, I worry much more about making factual errors than that stuff. I totally have the sweat, like, what's wrong in this? What's wrong? And I go back and I'm checking stuff over and over again because I don't want to get stuff wrong. Because there was no contract or any designated destination for this book, I kind of give myself a certain freedom just to try to write it the way I felt like writing it, and then go back and adjust it afterwards. And so maybe like a few decades of doing this helped too. So, Chris.
Sure. Another question? Oh man, there's so many. Someone's pointing to the person in the back. So because there's two people pointing at them, you should get the question. No offense to everyone else. Please go ahead. The weirdest thing discovered.
Weird is a complicated word.
There's a lot of weird.
I mean, nothing's weirder than Metal Machine music, although like a possum comes in a little bit. Although that's grown a little bit too. A couple of discoveries on American Poet, which is a live album from '72 that came out 30 years later. There's a radio interview track where this, it's a typical '70s radio DJ asking Lou questions, and he brings up Doug Yule, who was in the Velvet Underground, and Lou says, "I hope he's dead." So that certainly is a stopper of a moment there. Not weird so much, but a really cool thing. And you'll find it on a streaming service. There is a song, these songwriter shows where people play their songs and talk about them in between. There's a Bottom Line songwriter show with Lou and Chris Christopherson together.
Yeah.
And it is a fascinating listen because they alternate songs and they talk with each other and they have things to say about each other. And Lou talks quite a bit about his songwriting process in it. And Christopherson is a mixture of admiring and goading him at the same time. And he's a brilliant writer too. And so look that up on your streaming service. That is really worth a listen.
Thank you everyone for coming here. Jim, thank you so much. This has been such a treat. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but I know you're sticking around to sign the book.
Yes,
and I'm sure answer a lot of questions.
You can find my email at the Journal Sentinel if you want to send me a question or tell me I'm an idiot. Go ahead and do that there. So.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.